Well,
Cameron, how's the bus coming along?
Thanks. I'm actually in it right now, so I don't know
Nice.
there we go.
if you can see the wood work, which has been
yeah.
dominating my life. This wheel well is really been a pain.
Whoa.
Wow, that looks great.
Back over there is where the stove's gonna go.
Right.
Cool.
And to set the ambiance, my gravel rig, what was Mark's gravel rig, is behind me.
Cool. Are you doing all that woodwork?
I am. Yep.
Whew.
Yeah, I pulled oak tongue and grooves out of somebody's home who was refinishing their whole house, and they said salvage what you can. You probably won't be able to do much with it, so here we are.
Perfect.
If you value your personal time at nothing, it's amazing what you can do.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, folks. I'm going to start things up. We might have some people joining. I'm Cameron Sanders. If you know me on Instagram, I'm Renaissance Cyclist. I'm not the only one that posts the Renaissance Cyclist, but I'm the person who posts the vast majority of the time. Although not often the subject of photos, because I'm usually the one taking the photos. The other individual on Renaissance Cyclist is my partner, Lay. She is the breadwinner this time of year and during this pandemic. So she is an essential worker managing a brew pub that still does takeout right now here in Anchorage, Alaska. Wow. And then we have a friend of ours who also has the keys to Renaissance Cyclist.
It's inside a bus. It's a school bus.
I met
He's finishing it.
Helping him go to Mongolia, and we just rode the Baja Divide in January.
And his girlfriend's got breast cancer.
There's a few people I want to give a shout out on the line. There might be more frame builders and industry insiders out there that I'm not aware of. If so, you can, let us know that you're out there and what you do. But Mark Hall of Mahall Bikeworks is going to be chatting with you here in a little bit. Mark and I have a relationship that we started during the Skull gravel bike race, which actually I'll tell you a little bit of update about that given the pandemic and what we know at this point in time here in a little bit. But we also have folks from Paragon Machine Works on the line. I've never actually met any of those fine folks, but definitely have spent a lot of time with their handiwork. So thanks for that. The Mr. Paul is on the line. I've had the pleasure to meet you once, Mr. Paul.
Hey.
Love your everything.
Thank you.
Eric is on the line with Myth Cycles. Like your work, never ridden it, but I'd love to throw my wheel over a Pinion bespoke steel bike one of these days, and your work looks pretty outstanding. And then I have Kevin and Russ, both with Rin Cycles on the line. They do inverted forks. Most of you probably know them for the fat bike cold weather forks. Mark and I have been chatting with those folks about inverted 50 to 70 millimeter gravel bike forks here recently, and we're pretty excited about the concept.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark. If you scroll your little banner at the top of your screen, he's got, I think, 4 cameras up in where the magic happens, which is your garage, right?
Right, 3 at least. Yeah, so the thought here is just get folks together, clients, riders, frame builders, the industry guys, chat about bikes in kind of a different forum and format and just have some fun. It's definitely kind of an ad hoc thing. We'll throw people that have questions. If you have questions, shoot the moderator a chat message, and we'll take some questions out afterwards. Sure. We definitely want to feature the frame builders. Eric is here from Mystic Cycles, and if the industry folks have something they'd like to say, promote, let folks know, just let us know. We'd love to have you, and we'll try to do this every 2 to 3 weeks. We'll just see where it goes. Yeah, so thanks all for being here. I'm gonna throw it back to Aaron and even talk about the Phoenix ride.
Yeah, so Mark's going to tell you more about the bike we're building, but the impetus for that comes from a route that you might have heard on my Instagram wall. I've posted about it a lot. Can you all hear me, by the way? We all good?
Yeah.
Oh, good here. Yeah,
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share, actually, and some of you might have already seen this. Let's see here. Screen share. Okie doke. So you can find some links to the Catholic Climax and the rig that I took, Mark's bike. There's a bikepacking.com article about the Mahall that I took. You can find links on Mark's sites in the blog about a lot of the bikepacking trips we've done, trips to the Arctic. But then also down here, you can see the rig and the whole story. Also, Ralph Prima is on the line. I think Lauren's running a little bit late, but we've been working with those guys doing some great gravel wheels that are 24 spoke. And this load right here was 117 pounds when I was out scouting the Catholic Climax route, because 11 days worth of food, entirely self-supported, and multiple days without water. So the Catholic Climax route, again, it's under things to do under the adventureharney.com site, which is where you go for the Skull gravel bike race. The Skull, I could talk about it for forever, but in short, it's a race that happens in Eastern Oregon. It happens in Burns, Oregon. That's the town where the Mahall Wildlife Refuge occupation occurred. I was a lifelong career Forest Service ranger, before that park ranger, and I worked on public affairs during this occupation. And if you don't know about the militia occupation of this refuge, there's a great NPR podcast that is worth listening to while you might be social distancing. But essentially, out of a really bad event, the whole community wanted to get together and kind of do some rebranding. And we said to ourselves, what's the low-hanging fruit here? And it was just immense gravel biking. Eastern Oregon is, yeah, I love it up here in Alaska, which is where I'm chatting to you all from. But Oregon has so much more variety and difficulty of extreme gravel than anywhere else I've ever been. I just got off the Baja Divide, and the whole time I was thinking, this is really comparable to some of the stuff in Eastern Oregon. So when we did the Skull, it's a 120-mile one-day race. And people just fell in love with that ride. And I said, we could do something so much crazier if people are into that. And that's where I just started piecing together. I used to live in Prairie City. I build routes on Ride with GPS, ambassador routes. And I built all these little loops up here on Ride with GPS. So I had a couple of ambassador routes, and I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool to come over here and connect it to the Skull and do like a longer couple-day race? Well, 5 years have gone by, and this is what the project has become. Every time I go down to Oregon each year to go back and work with the people with the Skull and direct that race, I spend a month touring in the region just trying to get this route finished. And I can't seem to finish it because I keep adding more to it. But the route has finally reached its kind of max loop, and that's around just over 900 miles, but it's well over 1,000 if you do all the sub loops of this route. And we're looking at having another tour divide style venue, mostly looking for people to just to bike pack it, but also to set it up as an endurance gravel cycling race, similar to the tour divide. It will roll out. And this is kind of the behind the scenes right now. It's not an officially published route on bikepacking.com. There's some sections that I haven't finished vetting yet, but it's 95% complete, having written all of this. There's some interesting land disputes out there, which I could spend a whole day talking about, but it's good to have somebody to have pre-rode all of this. There's the ability to bite this off in chunks. But when I say gravel, I grew up in southern Missouri, and it's not the gravel of southern Missouri. And even from somewhere as rugged as Alaska, it's not the gravel of Alaska. Really, I've taken Mark's gravel bike, which has an interesting backstory if you head over to the bikepacking.com read if you haven't read that. The gravel bike of Mark's that I've been riding, it actually used to be Mark's. That gravel bike, we've really pushed it to the limits, and I've modified it a lot to do all these natural surface roads, because to say that it's a gravel bike route isn't really fair. It's more natural surface than gravel. And I really think that, for me, I don't care about racing it, but I truly believe that when people try and knock this out, which I have some friends who are ultra endurance world level riders who are really interested in setting some fast times on this. I do really think that a tire like the Schwab G1 27.5 by 2.8, those handful of gravel mid-fat tires that are out there are actually going to be the tread that wins the day on a race like this. This is, again, you can check this out in more detail, but this was last year's scouting mission. This is kind of the eastern half of what will be the Cap the Climax route. And I flew into Boise from Anchorage, Alaska, and rode out to Burns to direct the race. And even though this part isn't out of the Snake River climb, it's out of on the Cap the Climax route, if you're from Idaho or you want to fly in and do the ride, I highly recommend this link up. It's great. In fact, I think, this photo is right when you leave the Snake River Valley, right around in here. And from that point on, it's just 280 miles to the next tree. This is on a couple days in from that specific route. I can't say enough how absolutely mind-bending the riding is in this part of the country. It is worthy building a gravel-specific bike just for these needs. But we went hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of never seeing another soul. And to be able to load that much equipment, you're riding under a lot of your own self-sufficiency and mechanical failures, tacoed rims. We got some death mud buildup right there. There's very high consequence riding out here. So that's why Mark and I have put such a specific niche lens, and that's why we have a bike with an absurd chainstay length at 530, looking at what's ideal for this route. And again, there's tons of metadata. If you're interested in riding portions of the route, this one right here has some exclamation points, because those are unvetted areas that might have private property issues based on easements that goes through ranchers' lands. But in short, that's what I've been working on. My goal is to finish the route, publish the route, and have the race start next year. But that was before the COVID-19 pandemic. And pretty much most of March and April, I've defaulted to having to push everything back another year. However, I did get a call from the Chamber of Commerce manager from Burns, and they were talking to the state of Oregon, and we're going to have a conference call on the 29th of April to see if this goal is still happening. And actually, the most recent guidance we're getting from the state of Oregon is that the race could very well still be on. That we probably won't have the group meal that we normally do, which will be a letdown. But as far as riding, even if we have 200-300 riders, there's a great blog from one of the riders from the Kona Adventure team, the first female to ever finish the 120. She said that she got 6th place and she didn't see another person other than the people at the aid stations the entire race. So even if you're riding with 300 people, you're still pretty distant when you're riding out here. And again, I have nowhere to be this evening, so if you have any questions about the cap, the bikes, the skull, or my bus build, as you had a second ago, let me know. The plan is to turn this into a bike school at some point, but a mobile bike school, but that's a story for a different day.
Awesome.
And I want to kick it over to some of our other folks on the line. As long as I was going to toss it back to Mark first, though, in case you wanted to talk about some of the specifics of what's going on in your jig and where you're sitting at with the bike design.
Yeah, we'll walk around the shop a little bit, but are there any questions or comments at this point?
We want to hear about the Chainstays.
Yeah, man. So we're going to get to that soon here. So Cameron, as Cameron mentioned, his current gravel bike was originally built for me. That was about frame 12. I'd been on put about 15,000 miles on another gravel bike. It was a little bit too stiff. I wanted to build kind of a light, fast machine. Met that goal, and then Cameron came along and said, "Well, why don't you borrow this thing for a while?" So we built it up for his purpose, and he started telling me the riding he's doing, and I got nervous. Not gonna lie, but it's held together. I don't know how many miles Cameron's got on that crazy machine, but yeah, not sure why it hasn't broken yet. But through all our chatting, I started thinking about what kind of machine or frame design really should be on at this point. Obviously, a little heavier tubing. Really like the construction, the Reynolds 631 tubes we're working. It's not a heat treated tube, but that's a really nice tubing. He liked the lug construction. Front end handling was a little too twitchy, and he's got that bike so loaded up. He needed longer chainstays. And he told me about a fat bike built by Defiance with really long chainstays, and we started chatting about what conditions that bike was good at. And so I started thinking about that. I've been thinking about wide tires on gravel bikes for quite a while, especially for bike packing. I have a concept that that many people have overbought. Bike packing machines is what should be after for a lot of people, with time constraints and jobs, is really 1 or 2 nights out on the trail, and so a big mountain bike fully loaded is a bit much. I've always wanted to build a lighter gravel bike, a lighter bike packing machine with wider tires, and then the longer chainstays help. Especially when loading. I want to ask Cameron a little bit to explain his experience on the long chainstay fat bike he's been riding the last couple of years.
Yeah. Real quick about the frame material as well. I have broken a lot of frames bike packing. A lot of True Temper was the first handbelt bikes that I had, and there's various reasons for that, and there's various ways that I've broken bikes: down tubes, seat tubes, stays. But when I met Mark, he was looking at one of the handbell bikes that I had at that point in time, a fat bike, and he was looking at it, and I told him, yeah, I've been breaking a new bike every year for the last like 5 years while bike packing. And Mark said, that's unacceptable. So that's where our relationship began. I met him at the school. I jumped on his bike, which was not designed to do what I do. And the 631 Reynolds with lugs I can't break it. And it's a huge frame, which the bigger the frame is, the more flex that gets put on the frame. And also the more room I have to load on it. It's solidly like 2 sizes too big for me, but I love the loading capacity. And I had 13 liters of water on me at most times when I was scouting the Cap the Climax, that route. Hopefully you won't have to carry that much when you do it on your own. But right now I'm building it. So I don't know if I hit a dead end, I have to go all the way back. And in some of those cases, that's a round trip of 150 miles. I have to be prepared with water. But yeah, as most of you know, I live in Alaska. Nowadays, I've moved all around the country, but I've come and gone from Alaska a ton. And I've also lived and worked extensively in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So I am really well versed in bikepacking on loose terrain. And because of that, I've done a lot of fat tires and also longer stays. What you get with longer stays is a couple of things. Obviously, the longer it is, the more stable the bike is. That's one of the things that we learned first. It's one of the reasons you can hardly ever tip a tandem over. It's so long. It's extremely stable. May not be twitchy if that's what you're into riding, fast single track, but it's stable. But the other benefit, which I especially learned by biking half of the entire year on snow and ice in Alaska, is the weighting of the tires. And kicking the rear tire back away from you, which is generally the opposite of what we're all trying to strive for, as the industry has really pushed short stays, which, believe me, I love a short stay bike as well. But excuse me, when your weight is fully over that rear wheel, you cannot air down the tire as much, which having just rode in a place like the Baja Divide, I was on a long stay, approximately 500 millimeter stay fat bike, not as long as the gravel bike we're building, but still long, although by no means as long as something like the Salsa Blackborough, which is 650 stay length. So somewhere between a long bike and not a long bike, a mid-long bike maybe. I don't know of very many bikes out there that exist at that stay length. But what happens is you can get a much more even load between your tires, and you can run lower rear PSI and still get float and get all the advantages that you would with a tubeless tire aired down. And what I found with a 500 millimeter stay length in Baja, doing the Baja Divide, is that all the struggles that people just talk about, if you're familiar with the Baja Divide on the forums online, I didn't have any of those problems. People talk about how hard the route is and how difficult the route is, and I bike all the time, but believe me, I'm a pretty average biker skill-wise. I just like to bike long distances. So I'm not out setting any distance or time records by any means. In fact, I was humbled the entire time thinking of Pete Bassinger and Lael Wilcox's ride on the Baja Divide and the insane times that they can throw down. But all of the areas where people struggled, I had no problems with whatsoever. And when I rode the Baja Divide, Mark and I had already been talking about a gravel bike, and I daydreamed of the gravel bike that's in his jig right now while I was on the Baja Divide. The ability to have that long stay, the ability to fluctuate my PSIs accordingly, to get lower ones when I need to. And I do think that the gravel 2.8 is a sweet spot where you can get very wildly varying bike behavior is based on air pressure. You can run, especially with a tire like the Schwabe G1, you can run it and be almost as fast because of the tire profile and the 40 millimeter wide rim. You have a very small contact patch at 2.8 at a high PSI. If you ran through wet paint, you know, you'd see it. It's tiny. That tire flies side by side on an actual with somebody on a gravel specific race tires. I don't feel like there's much of a loss there at all. But then when you air down the tire, you can get float in places that you just can't go. There's places on the Cap to Climax, you actually ride through a desert. You leave the road completely and you just go straight across a desert. And that's the Alfred Desert, which is kind of a popular destination that's part of the route if you've been to Eastern Oregon. But there are some BLM roads that interconnect out there that I wanted to make part of the route, and I just couldn't on this bike. I couldn't get the float. I was just pushing my bike, and there's no water, and it's dangerous. But yeah, it's on my mind. I haven't done the Tour Divide. I'd love to do the Tour Divide. I would like to do a long trip in Mongolia within the next year and a half, and I'd love to return to the Baja Divide, even though I just did it. It was fantastic. But number one priority is the Cap to Climax, and it just so happens that the build that I want for the Cap to Climax is also perfect for those other ultra endurance kind of gravel heavy, mountain bike light builds. And what we're talking about is a really niche bike, but you know it's becoming less niche every year as these routes gain in popularity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the long chainstays is a really interesting idea. I was just looking at like, you know, kind of a standard fat bike design, and the front center is like somewhere around, for a size large, somewhere around 725. And so if you think that those chainstays, you said they're 530. So that's, what is that like? I mean, roughly 2/3, a little bit more so than the front center. You know, depending on where your weight is at, depending on the seat tube angle, your weight should be a lot more evenly distributed between the tires. I've always thought that long chainstays, at least on fat bikes, make a ton of sense. You just seem to float better and get further. The only time I find that that kind of tends to be a problem is when things get steep enough that you can't get enough weight on the rear wheel and it breaks loose. So how long did you say the chainstays were on the fat bike you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe my chainstays are around 500, but
Okay.
Lay has a medium Defiance, and unfortunately Daniel with the Defiance Frameworks, who's the only frame builder in Alaska, registered frame builder out of Homer, Alaska, has been catching up because during all this crazy COVID business, he was down rafting remote rivers. So he had a wild world to return to. I believe Lay's bike is like 520, 540, somewhere in that range. We all use Paragon sliders, so we got some variability there. Her bike is really bizarre geometry-wise. And it's the first bike that had stays of that magnitude. That really surprised me in its ride quality. And what I found is, like you said, with climbing, it's very, very interesting because you don't necessarily do as poorly as what you think when you're in aggressive areas, because you can lower the PSI in the rear tire because your center of mass is not directly over it. And whenever I've tested Lay's bike, which it is too small for me, my center of weight is when I'm climbing is almost directly dead center of the bike, right between the wheels. And it doesn't give you a feeling that you would normally get in a gravel bike where you stand and, you know, you feel, you know, really aggressive, your Lance Armstrong powering up something. It's more of a putter uphill, but you never get the pull back as you would expect. It's like impossible on a bike that's that long. And for somebody who's doing bike packing, it just immediately clicked that this is something that no matter what is coming down the line, I can just sit in my saddle and just grind and grind and grind and grind and grind and grind, and nothing throws it off. And that's what she was on in the when we rode Baja Divide. And mine's a little bit more traditional mountain bike geometry, although still long. I think her bike, everybody by the end of the trip, our other friend was on a Surly ECR. And our other friend was on the Santa Cruz Chameleon. And we all liked our bikes, but I think we all envied Lay's the most. And hers was the most center balanced of our rigs.
Why do you have sliding dropouts? Why do you use those?
So many reasons.
Maybe besides converting to single speed.
Well, I have more single speeds than I do any other bike. So that is a good number one. And then a dingle speed. You can't forget about the dingle speeds out there. But the sliding dropouts, aside from the ability to change the geometry of the bike from a practical stance bikepacking, my number one concern is that if I ever blow my derailleur up, I can tension the chain. I can shorten the chain, tension it, and ride out. Before I knew anything about bikes, before I knew how a derailleur worked, I thought it was just magic. And when I was buying Craigslist bikes for $50 and trying to ride with a 44-liter Osprey into the backcountry, when I knew nothing about it, the first thing that made me want to know more about a bike was when I broke a derailleur on the Resurrection Pass Trail in Alaska and had to walk 22 miles out. I was really upset.
That would do it. That answers the question.
However I can make that never happen again, I will do that. So yeah, they're multi-purpose. They do lots of things. But that, for me, is one of the big ones. And actually, I did meet, I met a guy on the what trail is it? The North Highland Trail in Michigan, who was walking out a titanium muckluck because he had broken his derailleur. And I stopped and said, you can ride that thing out. And he just didn't even realize he had the ability to do it. But yeah. Any more questions out there?
Yeah, something to keep in mind. And one of the reasons long chainstay bikes get a little bad rap is there isn't one available, in my opinion, that's been designed right. Typically, the bikes also have very slack front steering geometry. So it's slow in the front, slow in the rear. It's really nice for really slow bikepacking, but for the right experience, it's not a good experience. And so people focus on the long chainstays, not realizing that, hey, that what's going on up front is not working. So on Cameron's bike, the steering geometry is a little slacker than my typical gravel geometry, but it's still in line with what people out there. So it's not as slack as Cameron wants. So the point there is that with a proper bike design, we can balance the effects of the long chainstays with slightly more aggressive steering. I really think the handling aspects of long chainstays gets overblown. I mean, years ago I started saying that the effect of long chainstays, what people think it is largely urban myth. Most riders won't really notice it. If you give them a chainstay 420 versus 460, they really not notice it. And of course, that's not what the magazines tell folks, right? So I'm gonna go around and we'll look at the jig here.
Yeah, let's see the shop.
We'll walk around a little bit. So last night I fluxed and pinned the frame, so it's ready for tack raising. an after-tack raising that goes on the alignment table. That's one. That would be one of 4 alignment steps after that, after each joint is back on the alignment table. So it's lug construction to keep the schedule on this. We've got relatively tight schedule, so the frame geometry is pretty road in the front angles.
Hey, Mark. I
Yeah.
don't think we're hearing you all the way.
No. Okay.
If you're saying anything, Mark, I don't think we can hear it.
Look, again.
All right, how's that?
That's better.
Yeah. Nice. I'll just repeat a couple things here. So a shot of the back end of the frame. I've just done this for rough kind of fit up layout for the meeting here. So we got Paragon sliders and Columbus triple bend chainstays. I've used these on 5 frames and even fat bikes. It just seems to be my go-to stay now. I'll measure this. Center to center is, what's that? Right about 530, 530. So yeah, I wasn't quite sure I'd be able to do it with that chainstay, but it's definitely happening.
Are you even going to have a drop off that tube?
Say again?
Are you even going to have a drop off of that tube, or are you just going to slot the end right at full length?
No, what I do on the tips, I braze in a plug, about a 20 millimeter steel plug. Then I slot it on the milling machine, and then I'll also scallop the ends on a milling machine. That shows up on my Instagram post. But it's a really solid chainstay dropout interface that way. I don't know of anyone else doing that, but you get a basically solid steel to solid steel interface that way. And then I
Cool.
silverize it all up. Let's see, pan through the shop. So the shop is actually half my garage. I won't show the other half. It's not as cool. Harding milling machine here. That's been a nice addition 2 years ago. I haven't found anything on with frame building I can't do on this thing yet. And I just got a frame back from the powder coater this afternoon. So this is the gravel frame, fillet brazed, Reynolds 631 again. I think it has Columbus stays. It does have Columbus stays. So this turned out pretty nice.
Beautiful.
That's awesome.
Here's the dropout interface that I was talking about. So this is how Cameron's frame will look. Like I said, a steel plug is brazed in back in here. And then
Okay, yeah, I get it. Cool.
It's a nice way to do it. It's a little more labor, but so what?
Yeah, and you'll see on the bike that I got from Mark, whenever I first borrowed it, the number 1 thing I said off the bat was, "Oh man, it's not a sliding dropout." And not only that, but it's integrated, which I'm very fearful of, and I have had to bend it many times, but it's still there, which is pretty amazing. But I'll feel great when it's no longer hard fast hanger integrated onto that. While I'm chatting, if you all could mute your mics if you're not talking, just so we don't get as much feedback. Thanks.
One thing I'd like to do is bring the client on for this frame. She's on. I didn't tell her I was going to do this, but I'm sure she won't mind. Brittany, can you get on and tell us a little bit about what your motivation was for the bike and certainly these colors?
Yeah, actually, it was a very pleasant surprise to get the photo of it all painted today. So super stoked. But yeah, I actually was browsing Instagram, and I learned of Mark frame building through another coworker that I work with. So then I started browsing Instagram, and I came across this bike that had this curved top tube, and I just said, yep, I need one of those. So got in touch with Mark and said that this frame, which is someone else that's actually on here too, Barry, it's an inspiration of his frame, but with a single top tube. So it's just super unique, and I had to have it, and there it is now, almost done. Can't believe it. But so kind of just a quick background of I got into bikes actually a few years back with a road bike that I bought for, I don't know, $250 off Craigslist, and didn't know if I would stick with it, and fell in love with it. I used to live in California, so I'd ride it to the beach and ride it along the pier to the end of the pier and back home and what have you. And grew out of that one, ended up getting more bikes, and came across this whole world of bike packing that I had no clue about, and decided that's what I want to do. I'm tired of these organized races and putting me in a box of you have to do these certain things, and just want to get out there and do whatever I want on my own time. So long story short, I'm only 5'1", not very tall. So packing a bike for me on any sort of pre-bought frame is ridiculous. You can't hardly have a frame bag. It's really difficult. So I challenged Mark to build this frame where that curved top tube will allow me more capacity than any other bike I would ever get to put a frame bag in and start packing on. And so we kind of developed this guy here, which I'm just ecstatic, and I'm just keep hoping every day that the skull keeps happening, because this is going to be my ride for the skull this year. So my husband and I plan to do the 60 mile. So I just want to tear it up with this thing. And I guess the one good thing about COVID is it looks like all the trails will be great to just get out and not be around anyone. So I think we're going to try to really get our feet wet and kind of get started on what bike packing is all about, because I'm just barely getting into it. So I'm hoping that all goes well, and I just find and work through things, and maybe one day do the Tour Divide. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of it. I don't know, Mark might have more info on the development of it and what the kind of the real nuances were on this one, but I'm just
I think you covered it,
to get
Brittany.
it out.
Yeah, thanks. And the next steps, I'll do the assembly prep, and it's going to get a painted graphics panel here, and we'll put it together and let Brittany go on and hammer the thing. It's a lot of fun for frame builders to talk about a bike that doesn't exist at the start of the conversation. It's my favorite thing about frame building, actually, is
is to just start that conversation and figure out goals and ideals and ideal rides and design a ride around that goal. So this bike here was built in 2015. This is Eric Melby's bike pack machine. He did the Tour Divide last summer, 30-day trek from Banff, Canada to the US-Mexico border. And Eric's kind of the same way. He described his ideal ride and what he wanted to do with the thing. He was just finishing up his doctorate and obviously needed a bike to celebrate. So we built this thing. It was this was the first 2 weeks it's actually had a chain on it. We designed it as a belt drive, and he's used it as a belt drive bike all this time. He had a roll-off rear wheel for the Tour Divide, and he thought he'd mix it up and throw a chain on it and see what's going on. It just happens to be in the shop this week for some headset maintenance, and Chris King took really good care of us on that and showed us some things and replaced some parts that were worn. I can't imagine a headset wearing out on a Tour Divide, but it did, right? So yeah, this has been a good machine for Eric, and we're still having fun and talking about it. So it's been a good project. One more bike happens to be here. I borrowed this one. This was my first 29er built, classic 29er geometry, lug construction like Eric's. And these 29ers, I built 3 of them. It does take a lot of lug work to match up the lug angles with the frame angles, but it's fun. It ends up being a really nice ride. It's not an enduro machine. I tell clients they're not going to go off to 3-foot dropouts with this, but it's a really fun single track bike. And I lighten up tubes quite a bit, and it ends up being a really reliable machine. This one was built in 2014. Yeah. So that's the shop. Any other questions, comments? Cameron, do you have anything else?
I was just going to ask Eric if he'd like to show us his shop and what he's got hanging around.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. Let's see. I guess I might just do kind of like a quick shop tour here. Let me know if you can't hear me at any point. So this space is a little bit new to me. We bought this house about a year ago, and this garage was just studs when we got in. So I spent most of last year insulating and electrifying and heating and all that, this space. So I've only really kind of settled in for the last maybe 4 or 5 months, and I'm still kind of getting settled in. But yeah, so kind of basic workspace. This is one of my mills, just a small horizontal mill. Got a couple dedicated fixtures kind of set up on it. It's kind of my goal to have as many dedicated fixtures as I can to speed up the process a little bit. I have a real lathe now. I've only had this for about a year.
Wow.
And it makes my life so much easier.
Whoa, more pictures of the lathe.
Okay. It's really hard to find real machine tools in Colorado. And
Wow.
this is a Cincinnati Hydra Shift.
Yes.
Not sure if you're familiar with these, but it's a gearhead lathe, but everything in there, there's these 3 hydraulic pistons, and this gigantic Bakelite knob changes.
Yeah.
So it basically just tells which pistons to go where.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's not a terribly heavy machine. It's only like 2,200 pounds, but it beats the South Bend I had by a long shot. So
Heck yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
really happy about that. Bridgeport, which kind of is the catch-all for does everything. There's no real dedicated fixtures set up on that, but And then this thing, which I finally just got going, I got for crazy cheap because it was in pretty bad shape, but I'm trying to get a couple fixtures on that as well. As far as just kind of like what I've got going on right now, what was that? Well, so I don't have a lot going on. I build a lot of mountain bikes for those who don't maybe follow too much of my work. A lot of mountain bikes. I tend to be bike packing centric, but I'm finding that a lot of people who buy my bikes are people who are riding them every day. So I've been playing around with a couple things recently. One of them actually is some handlebars. It's kind of like a Jones bar, but not. I don't know. It's a little bit further. The grip is a little bit further forward than a Jones bar. So I'm going to weld that up, play with it a little bit. But the big thing for me right now is what's in the jig right now. And I'll see if anybody can spot what's unique about it. So that's what I've been working on, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about it. So yeah, not too much going on, just a standard frame builder 2-car garage.
How's it been working with the Paragon or the Pinion drive? Sorry.
Pinion is great. Let's see, I've built a few Pinion bikes right now. That last one that went out was a fat bike, which was interesting, just because Pinion only has one way to offset the cog from the gearbox. And so it's like, it's pretty big. It's not as small as some of the direct mount cogs that you can use for regular chain lines. Yeah, I mean, I like the Pinion so far. I think it's really cool. I have to admit, I kind of feel like it's like a first system. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody comes out with like a competing system that, I don't know, that works better. I think honestly my biggest complaint is just the way the box mounts to the frame. Bridges are really hard to work with. But I've been finding some good ways around that, so it hasn't been too bad. Cameron, have you had any experience with any Pinion bikes or any kind of curiosities about them?
I've done a lot of internal gear hub riding, but not anything with the gearbox, the Pinion, unfortunately. You know, I've done a lot of bike packing on the Alpine, like gravel light Alpine bike packing, and I've owned a roll off.
Got an 11 right there.
You know, I had dreamed for so long of owning a roll off, and finally broke the bank and got one, and then became one of the only guys in Anchorage that could work on them. And you know, I really don't like them, to be completely honest. I love the concept of them. I really did not like it. There was, you know, I'm not somebody that needs 600 points of engagement to have fun. I won't shun it by any means. High engagement is a lovely thing. But I found that the roll-off had like that 1/8 turn kind of slack movement. And then being in Alaska, it was so sensitive to cold weather. I mean, all hubs do. I have worked over the years with Fatback, and we remove the grease in our hubs for doing the Iditarod Trail Invitational, and we rate them down to 80 below zero. the vast majority of people will never need that. But it's amazing what bearings will fail in the cold weather, and all the reasons why I bought the roll-off. It also has a tendency to leak oil out of one side. In transit, I just consistently had issues with it, and I bought it to not have issues. So yeah, after that ordeal, I kind of threw out the internal gearing thing and just decided if I wanted simplicity, I would just go single or single speed. But the pinion drive definitely intrigues me, in large part because not only does it make a lot of sense if you can get the weight in the middle of the bike and off the wheel, but also, you know, all it takes is for you to go bike packing so long, learn how to load the bike, learn to keep your heavy weight low, and you'll gain an appreciation for, you know, the concept of why I think so many people like e-bikes, e-mountain bikes, is because the Bosch system has 80 pounds of weight down on the down tube, and when you weight a bike with that much lower mass, it tends to be super stable. So I can see the appeal of the pinion. So yeah, every time one of your pinion bikes pops up on my Instagram feed, I lust after trying it for a little bit.
Yeah, Pinion is cool. You know, I guess for folks maybe that follow me, they already know, but I do kind of a combination of fully custom bikes, and then I have a range of bikes that are kind of my semi-custom bikes that have set geometries and things. But I've been considering adding a semi-custom bike that is just a bike packing specific Pinion bike. And I don't know, I don't think it's the end all be all. I mean, I guess I'm naturally kind of pessimistic. I tend to find, you know, the weaknesses in every system, including all of my own. Maybe that's the problem. But, you know, I think something you mentioned was like engagement. And I think the Pinion is actually even worse than the roll-off, because the actual gearbox itself has a ratchet within it. And so the gearbox ratchet and then whatever hub you have, the added amount of disengagement will kind of like, they'll both engage at the same time. And it's not the end of the world, but you notice it, you know. And yeah, I mean, it's a cool system. Again, it's just kind of, I'm curious to see if anything else will come along. I don't know, it'll be hard to get away from the weight. I mean, the weight of those things it's pretty substantial, and they've done a great job of engineering it to be light. But yeah, I mean, you're carrying around a lot of hardened steel gears. I mean, there's only so many things you can do to make it lighter. So yeah,
Hey,
I thought that derailleurs are pretty awesome.
I'm pretty sure that Mark Norstad of Paragon has a Pinion bike.
Does it?
What's your opinion on the Pinion, Mark? It's a few years old. Can you hear me? Maybe not. Not working. All right.
I can hear you, Paul.
Well, I know. I guess Mark can't.
Tell me you can hear.
But I know he got one. It was right after they came out, and I've never talked to him about it. I've always wondered how that worked out. But
I remember seeing a titanium Pinion bike in his booth at a NABS maybe 5 years.
I think
6
that's
years
it.
ago?
Yeah, it might have been Triton.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Maybe. On another note, I'm going to jump in, and I got to skedaddle. But thanks for the invite, and been interesting. I love seeing your shops and all your frame building materials and your machinery. And that Cincinnati, that's a beautiful machine. I love it.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm a machine tool dork, but
yeah.
So I'll see you guys, and I got to go.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for stopping in, Paul.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I got a thing I got to do. Bye.
Cheers.
Cameron, yeah, we ought to wrap it up here. Give us a good intro for the next one in a few weeks anyway, right?
I guess the only other thing I was thinking to say is hopefully I'll see you at the Skull, Brittany, and your fancy new bike. I'm sure you'll crush it if it happens. If it doesn't happen, as long as you're following appropriate social distancing guidelines out there, those routes are public lands. So you can jump on and bike pack the whole thing. I definitely recommend, if the race doesn't happen, that you do the 120 route, because the 60 route is a really hard 60-mile race route. It's actually per mile harder than the 120, as far as just sheer ruggedness, because it holds BLM sagebrush lands that just beat the tar out of you. But the 120 goes up and over a 9,000 foot peak. Last summer, in middle of June, we had snow on it. And because of that, you get to go up and through all these unique biomes. That's just really cool. So if the Skull doesn't happen, it's there to bike pack. And if the Skull does happen, I do plan on potentially having an informal group bike packing route on some of my favorite places nearby on the Cap, if people are interested this year, just to show people a teaser of what that route will look like.
Yeah, Cameron, keep us informed on trail closures. Forest Service has still got a lot of trails closed. I don't think that's the case for BLM, hopefully not going forward, but keep us in the loop on that for Eastern Oregon.
Yeah, will do. I know state parks had a bunch of closures. That doesn't impact much out there. But yeah. And the Forest Service had they had a lot of their developed resources closed that wouldn't impact the vast majority of the projects that I do out there, which is all dispersed backcountry stuff. Still, those are really, really, really rural communities, and they don't see a lot of cyclists coming through. It's new to them, and we want to make sure that I'm keeping my ear to the ground to see how they feel, regardless of what the state's guidance is, to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure out there, because you only have a handful of what places you can possibly resupply. And if cyclists get a bad reputation because we want to go and bike pack ahead of time when we shouldn't be, we could really close some inroads there.
Okay, well, let's close it down. Thanks, folks, for joining. This was fun. Give us some feedback on what you'd like to see, or even if we should do it at all again. I think we should, but give us some feedback.
And we're recording this. I'll put it up on the Mahall blog afterwards.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Keep up the good work, boys.